Alrighty, so we got four more episode in the moving forward series left as we are now getting to the stage where we're going to talk about teams that got eliminated in the conference final. And let's start off with the team that got eliminated in the Eastern Conference final, that is Orlando City. And despite the fact that they finally defeat that narrative of them not able to pass the second round, this is the fifth straight year that they made it to the playoffs, but the previous four attempts, they always get stumped either in the first round or in the second round. But this year they finally defeated that narrative of making it to the conference final, but you just kind of had a sense that despite they defeated that narrative, this was a massive missed opportunity for them to make it to MLS Cup, especially with the way that by the time when we got to the conference final and even got to the second round, they were pretty much the head favorites of making it to MLS Cup out of the Eastern Conference. All the big hitter in the Eastern Conference were already eliminated. And while some might say that, against the Galaxy in MLS Cup. If they would have beat the Red Bulls, it's still a bit of a daunting task because, the Galaxy was a really strong team. And I do think that if we did see a matchup between the Galaxy and Orlando City, probably the Galaxy would have still won that matchup. You just kind of had a sense that still, for a team that has a lot of aspiration to finally reach the promised stand of MLS Cup, and with pretty much almost everything that gone their way with the Eastern Conference just completely collapsed with the top team being out. Like I said, this was a huge missed opportunity and an opportunity that they might let regret now that some of those teams that suffer a shocking early exit in the playoffs probably won't do it again next season. But that being said, they did finish the season with a 15-7-12 record, finished with 52 points. They scored 59 goals while allowing 50 goals with a plus 9 goal differential. They finished fourth in the Eastern Conference, but unfortunately, they lose to the New York Red Bulls at home in the Eastern Conference final. 1-0 was the final score in that game, and the only goal that was scored was from Andres Reyes that propelled the Red Bulls to make it into MLS Cup. Now, looking at the last five season, again, the last four season they made it to the playoffs, but unfortunately stumbled in the early rounds of the playoffs. Last year was probably the best regular season that the Orlando City has ever had, finishing second place with an 18-9-7 record, finished with 63 points, but unfortunately they lose to Columbus Crew and eventually the MLS Cup winner Columbus Crew in the second round, and that was a very uh uh that was a very good matchup in terms of the fact that it was one of those matchups where it was between two good teams that somebody unfortunately had to lose, and unfortunately Orlando City was on the wrong end of that. But in 2022 they finished in seventh place with a 14-6-14 record, finish with 48 points, but they lose to Montreal in the first round. In 2021, they finished sixth with 13-12-9 record, finished with 51 points, but lost to Nashville in the first round. And then in 2020, this was the first year under Oscar Pereira. They made it to the playoffs for the first time ever. Finally broke that drought of them not being able to make it to the playoffs in their first five seasons with an 11-8-4 record, finished with 41 points, but unfortunately losing to the New England Revolution in the second round. And then in 2019, this was before Oscar Pereira took over this team and really has got this team to be a regular playoff contender. They finished 11th with a 9-10-15 record, finished with 37 points, and obviously did not make it to the playoffs. Now, looking at the top goal scorer of this team, so we know that the top goal scorer of this team for Orlando City is no longer with this team anymore. We heard already about Facundo Torres moving on from this Orlando City side, going to Palmeiras for a huge amount of money, and they're definitely going to miss him. I mean, 16 goals that he contributed last season, that's going to be tough for them to try to replace. Then you got Duncan McGuire with 10 goals, Ramiro Enrique with 9 goals, Ivan Angulo with 5 goals, and Luis Muriel rounds up the top 5 with 5 goals. Top assist leader, you got Martino Ojeda with 9 assists, followed by Nico Ladero with 7 assists. Yes, Nico Ladero, he still got it. I mean, I think this season he has had a really underrated kind of season. I know, he's not the same Nico Ladero than what we have seen doing all his time with the Sounders, but still, you can see that he still has something left in the tank and a very good backup option in that number 10 spot for this Orlando City side. Then you got Ivan Angulo with 6 assists, Luis Moria with 5 assists, and Dagger for Holson rounds up the top 5 with 4 assists for this Orlando City side. Best win of the season. I'm gonna go with the 5-0 win that they had against DC at home. That was just a complete performance by Orlando City, and that really kind of was the start of just them starting to turn things around. Again, this team, when you look at how they play in the regular season, it's almost a carbon copy of what we saw last season. They got off to a slow start, couldn't really quite figure things out, and goal scoring was a big problem. But then something just clicked in the middle part of the season, go on a good run, and got themselves out in a really good form heading into the playoffs. And likewise, this was one of the turning point with them putting a dominant performance against DC in this one. But the worst loss of the season actually happened in the second half of the season. You would have thought I might have gone with one of the losses that they had in the first half of the season, but I'm actually going to go with the 3-0 loss that they had against Orlando City. Now, this is, of course, coming out of the Leeds Cup break, and I guess, maybe you could give Orlando City a little bit of an excuse because with the way that a lot of teams that have a long break coming back from the Leeds Cup, Orlando City is one of those teams that got eliminated very early in the Leeds Cup and were pretty much sitting home for a couple of weeks. They probably were not ready in this game against Sporting KC. But that being said, even that is the case, they were facing against a Sporting KC side that, not only has had a bad season doing that point, but it just looked way too easy for Sporting KC to easily win against Orlando. Even when Orlando were up a man in that game, Sporting KC actually found themselves down 10 men for the last 20 minutes. And this is also a team that has known to choke late leads. I mean, Orlando City just, again, they didn't really find any rhythm whatsoever, which is also kind of very rare for a Oscar Pereira side. That this is a team that has always been very good on the road, at least in the last two seasons under Oscar Pereira. But in this game, they just again look flat in this one. And again, maybe that excuse could be coming out of the Leeds Cup. They're just not get themselves back in sync. That For the season. Now, fortunately, eventually they do get things in sync, and that's why they were able to get home field advantage once again in the playoffs. And turns out they would get home field advantage pretty much throughout because of the way that the team above them pretty much simply suffer shocking losses after shocking losses. Now, in terms of average attendance, 22,805, which is good for 10 in the league. The attendance have definitely gone up for Orlando City game. Obviously, there are still times where in the summertime, especially, Orlando City game does feel a little empty, and that kind of makes sense because again, attending games in the summer, especially in the hot Florida uh weather, even if it's a night game, it is absolutely brutal. And I can definitely attest that because I actually did went to an Orlando City game back in October, and even though this was in October, and you would think that it's kind of the time where it doesn't get too hot in Florida, no, I mean I def it was still relatively hot, and I can definitely feel the humidity and the sticky kind of nature. And what's also kind of impressive in that game is that while the attendance wasn't really that good because it was a midweek game, it was still pretty decent. I think they announced like 20,000 plus, which again that's debatable considering there was a lot of empty seats around the stadium. It was still pretty good attendance, especially for a Wednesday game, and especially again for a midweek action, you wouldn't expect teams to do very well in terms of attendance compared to weekend games. Now, looking at the MVP of this team, I had a debate whether should I go with Facu Torres or Martino Ojeda. Both of these guys definitely was a keystone to this player. Facu Torres, obviously, remember how he completely fell off in the first half of the season, and then something just clicked for him, and he gone back to his old self. He kind of almost sums up the form that this Orlando City has had this season as well. Again, I could have also gone with Ojeda, consider he was the guy that was actually the number 10 for this team, was the orchestra of this team as well. And yeah, in the end, I'm gonna go with Torres mainly because again, it's not a surprise that Palmeiras offer a huge amount of money for him, and they're definitely gonna lose his presence and is one player that is going to be very tough for Orlando City to try to replace. Disappointment. This one was pretty easy. It's got to be Luis Muriel. I mean, there's really not much I have to explain how disappointing Luis Muriel's season has been. This was supposed to be a guy that was touted to be the replacement of Duncan McGuire. There's been a lot of talk about how Duncan McGuire was going to be sold in the summer transfer window. Obviously, that did not happen. But even then, I mean, again, just for a guy that he was given chances to prove himself that he's worth the DP amount of money, and it didn't really quite work out. And this is another example of how even in some of the best team, and Orlando City for the most part has got their DP spot pretty well, at least in the last couple of years. That is, sometimes you're gonna hit a bit of a dud, and this was definitely one of them. With just Luis Moria, looked like he was completely washed with the quality he has bring. I mean, for a guy that was really just a big goal scorer for that Atalanta team, he looked just completely washed up as soon as he stepped into MLS and into this Orlando City side. Now, in terms of young player to watch, I could have easily gone with Duncan McGuire, but I'm actually going to go with Ramiro Enrique, mainly because Enrique was actually the guy that won the starting number 9 spot over both McGuire and Luis Moria. I mean, if you would have told me that was the case, yeah, I don't think any Orlando City fans would have believed. But credit to Enrique, he finally got his moment when McGuire, of course, was spending time in the IR, and Luis Moria, of course, obviously getting benched because of his poor performance. But Enrique basically made the best of his time. I mean, there was a time in the second half of the season where he was like averaging a goal every single game. He was definitely a very fun players to watch. And again, even though he's more of kind of a backup option, I feel like this might be the year that he kind of had a breakout season. And again, for a guy that is able to keep what was supposed to be the two number 9 that was going to get a share amount of starting minutes, very impressive to see how Enrique play. And no doubt that while his production definitely dried up near the end of the season, and that kind of is the case for this Orlando City side as we in the playoffs, their production really dried up in terms of the goal scoring near the end of the season and heading into the playoffs as well. He's a guy that could be a 10 plus goal scored heading into next season if he's going to get some starting minutes. So what went right for this Orlando City side? So again, they finally defeat that narrative of them exiting in the second in round. Again, prior to this season, they weren't able to get past the second round, and again, this is the deepest that they have ever gone in the playoffs. Like last season, they got hot in the second half of the season. Again, there were people that were calling for Oscar Pereira heads. And I don't blame Orlando City fans to do so because Oscar Pereira has been with this team for a while now, and I even said that it feels like the projectile that Orlando City is in right now under Oscar Pereira is kind of similar to what I remember him during his time with Dallas, where things kind of got a little stale near the end. Eventually, uh Dallas decided to move on from him because of the way that he can't really get this team over the hump. Well, this season, in some way, they finally were able to get over the hump in terms of the second round, and again, we'll see whether or not with them finally making to the Eastern Conference Final is that worthy enough for Pereira to get another. Well, he's gonna get another season, but after this season, if he can't really get this team deep in the playoffs, is there gonna be question of his jobs too? Because well, as much as he's done a really good job getting this team into the playoffs, it's got to be very frustrating if you're a fan seeing him leading a team that's just good enough in terms of making the playoffs, but just decided to not show up once the first or second round of the playoffs happen for the most part of this team. And then, of course, the other thing that went right, they got an absolute haul of the Facu Torres sale. Again, I know it's very reluctant for Orlando City to sell their best player in terms of their top goal scorer, but when you got that much of a haul that they got back, especially almost a record amount of transfer fee that Orlando City was able to get from Palmares, it's hard to not accept that deal. And indeed, they accept that deal. Obviously, that's going to be something that they could spend in terms of finding replacement and even maybe improve the roster as well. This team is definitely very talented, and I would say that if they do make the right signings, this team can definitely compete with those three teams that I've mentioned a lot in terms of talk about Eastern Conference team, and especially teams that are want to be among the best in the East. That is Miami and the two Ohio team. But obviously the thing that now we're going to talk about what went wrong. Again, like last season, the first half of the season was an absolute disaster. Like there was talk in the first half of the season, it looked like this team was going to end up as one of the most disappointing team of the year. And there's been a lot of talk of Oscar Pereira potentially losing his job because of how talented that the roster is, and yet somehow they were just sputtering on both on the attacking end and also on the defensive end and not getting the result. And then, of course, again, there's a huge missed opportunity of go to MLS Cup. This was probably the year that if you ask me after all those three teams that I mentioned with the two Ohio team and Miami getting eliminated, and I've said many times that this is really now the team to really get into MLS Cup and probably have the most pressure to do so in the East. The fact that they weren't able to do so, that just feels like it's a huge missed opportunity and one that, again, they probably would not get back, knowing that next season, those three teams I mentioned probably won't get eliminated in the first round. And we would probably not see as big of a shock as we saw in the Eastern Conference, where upset was just galore in the Eastern Conference this season. And then I also mentioned Luis Morel again just started to turn into a buzz as a DP. I mean, in the beginning, I thought maybe it's just him kind of needs to figure things out, as we usually see with players coming into a new league. But as the season goes along, he just didn't improve at any rate. And really, for a guy that also is kind of a veteran present and had been playing in multiple leagues, you would assume he would be able to step in straight away and be the goal scorer that he was doing at his time with Atalanta. But unfortunately, it just never worked out. And now there, if he has another bad season, Orlando City can't wait to trying to get rid of him, because you don't want to have one of your free DP to underperform, or any of your DP to underperform, and that's kind of the case with Luis Muriel right now. Now, moving forward, how is this Orlando City team is going to look? So far, they've been very quiet in terms of the offseason. They have pretty much signed no one this offseason. Obviously, we know that they made a big sale of Facu Torres, but you're going to assume that they're eventually going to spend that money to do so. I mean, on paper, this is still a good team. I don't think they're good enough as of now when it comes to being among the elite of the Eastern Conference. I think they definitely need to make some signings, especially the number one signing I think they will have to do is find a way to replace Facu Torres. I mean, that is a huge amount of goal production that they're gonna miss heading into the next season. And you would assume that they're gonna use a DP spot on him, because I think Facu Torres did occupy one of the DP spots. So that's going to be something that Orlando City will look to do. Now, I will say that as much as they have been quiet this offseason, there has been now some rumors that they're going to be signing someone and potentially finding a replacement for Facu Torres as well. And even when they do find that replacement, boy, that player that is going to step in, he's going to have a huge shoes to fill in terms of the production that Facu Torres left to this team. And then another thing that I don't think Orlando City fans think this is going to happen, and this might be a very unpopular take, but I do think that they eventually might need to look for a new goalkeeper. And the reason why I say this is a very unpopular kind of opinion is because everybody was going to assume that Galese is probably going to be the goalkeeper for this team, at least for the next couple of years. Well, while Galese was great in the playoffs and was okay in the second half of the season, the first half of the season was an absolute disaster. And you started to see that in the last couple of years, he just has not looked like the same player that he was when he came to Orlando City. And is that maybe also kind of due to the fact that he is getting a little older? He's going to be 35 heading into next season. And I know goalkeepers usually have a better longevity, but like any players that is, as you get into your 30s, it is definitely going to be tough to try to keep yourself at the top of the game. Now, a lot of players has that kind of ability, and you just kind of wonder, is maybe we're seeing the twilight career of Pedro Galese, and they might be thinking about looking for a goalkeeper as soon as this offseason. Keep in mind, his contract is going to be up at the end of this season, and if he does not have a great season on his contract year, you just kind of had a sense maybe they might think about moving on from him, which is again something that it seems very unthinkable, but it could be a reality with the way that Galese has definitely not been as good of a goalkeeper that he was compared to a couple of years ago. And then I think the last thing moving forward for this Orlando City side. So after the sale of Facu Torres, we know that there are a couple more Orlando City players that could be put on sale. I mean, for a long time we've been saying that it seems like Duncan McGuire is going to be that player that is going to be put on sale. I mean, last season he had an okay kind of season. He kind of regressed a little bit, but that was kind of expected. I mean, when you have a player that after having his dream move to Europe being denied by some incompetency that is going on with the front office, or as they call in England, the board of Blackburn Rovers. I mean, that's obviously a hard pill to swallow if you're Duncan McGuire, and not to mention he was battling injuries throughout the season, and even though he kind of lost his starting position, he still were able to score the goals. And again, I do think that there are going to be another team in Europe that is going to pick him up. But besides him, there are also other good young talent on this team that could get poached. I mean, Martin Ojeda is an example of it. A really great season, especially in the second half of the season, where he's going to be the new playmaker for this team in the near future. And even guys like Ivan Angulo and Romero Enrique, those guys have shown some promise. And even Cesar Araujo too, who he definitely didn't have had as good of a first season as he did last year, but still a guy that has high potential. That, yeah, those are some of the notable names that Orlando City could potentially be hearing some suitors knocking in terms of getting their best players away. So we'll see whether or not if they will listen to that offer. They'll definitely listen to it, but it's all about finding the replacement for it. Which, as I said many times, when you're trying to replace guys after you make a big sell, it's easier said to be done. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure to like, smash the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this moving forward series. And if you're an Orlando City fan, what do you think is the MVP, disappointment, young player to watch, what went right, what went wrong, and most importantly, moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next season? But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.